So as Roger said, we're going to try and split this evening into two parts. I was saying to somebody before we started, these days the demonstrations I do tend to be more classes and talks than demonstrations. People have so many questions about what it is they want to do and what it is they want to achieve in bonsai, and I think just watching somebody wiring and styling a tree is, quite dull. And it doesn't necessarily help you with your bonsai at home. So to that end, if you have any questions, feel free to shout out. I wanted to talk to you this evening about this is something we did for the club at Capel Manor, I think, last year, and Roger said, could we do something similar for you? And it seems to be everywhere I go now, we're talking more and more about how to build bonsai, because bonsai is a progressive thing, as you all know. It takes time, and it takes years, and it takes a degree of commitment and potentially a little vision as well. It's okay if you've got a nice tree that's already styled that you've just purchased. If you've got something that you want to develop as bonsai, something that you go up from the woods, rescued from the skip, or wherever you get things from. I think that people have a lot of questions, and there's a lot of misunderstandings because of what we've been taught historically about bonsai. And so I seem to be spending an awful lot of my time clearing up those issues for folk. So bonsai is a progressive thing, and what we would term a bonsai, everybody sort of tritely says, yeah, well, it's a tree in a pot, or that literal translation of the Japanese word. But to me, bonsai is a tree that's a small tree. It doesn't look like a small tree, it is a small tree. And in order to create a small tree, we've got to master our horticulture, we've got to master the growth habit of the tree, and we've got to manipulate that to achieve what we want to do. Now that happens in nature all on its own, because trees have a lot of external forces that act upon them to either encourage or restrict growth and so on. So from a bonsai perspective, obviously we're stepping in and becoming nature. So with a tree growing in a natural setting, it will reach at some point a size beyond which it can't really go because of limiting factors like, in this country, the amount of sunlight, or in other places perhaps a lack of water or a lack of nutrient in the soil, just the prevailing conditions, especially if it's growing on the coast. So there's lots of different factors that limit the growth potential of a tree. And in bonsai, we limit the growth potential to an extreme by growing things in silly small pots. Bonsai pots, as I've said previously, are probably the primary reason why people can't develop their trees, because bonsai pots, in essence, are designed to kind of stop things growing. So what we have to do before we approach bonsai is understand what it is that we need to achieve. So assuming that, this example I brought for you this evening is Portuguese oak. This is collected in Spain. It's a very common variety throughout most of the Mediterranean countries and grows as typically a scrub on low hills, and it can grow to make really big trees, but tends to be more of a scrub tree. And it's a variety we've had for a while and are getting on really well with, but it was just suitable for this evening's demonstration. But let's assume for a start that we're working with raw material. And the number one most important factor in relation to developing a bonsai tree, anybody want to hazard a guess? Roots. You got it. If we're collecting a tree, one of the things when you buy a Japanese tree that is very rarely mentioned, I think, is that you will, assuming you buy the right material, get a pot full of root. But you won't just get a pot full of root, you'll get a pot full of the right type of root. When you collect a tree, particularly broadleaf trees, particularly in this country where we have predominantly good fairly deep topsoil, you tend to get a lot of wood in the soil and not a lot of fine fibrous root. So the primary thing we have to do with any new material is build a root system. And that involves a process over a period of time of removing all the wood and all the big, thick... when you say taproot, everybody assumes there's just one, but there's all these big roots in the soil, especially if you get things like hedgerow material, privets and things. You'll probably have more wood in the pot than you will have soil. So progressively we've got to remove that. What we want is the base of the tree, the nabari and fine root. Now that can take any number of years to develop. With something like a privet, it's really easy. Olives, that type of thing, it's, you know, they're all the same family. You know, you can more or less just put a saw through it, cut it through, stand it on some soil, bury half an inch, and there's your roots. And within a couple of years, the pot's absolutely rock solid. So a lot of shrubby type materials do that really well. It tends to be the case that the taller and more powerful the tree naturally is in its natural form, the harder it is to develop that fine fibrous root. It's not hard and fast, but it tends to be the case. So there's a notion that we've collected a tree, so it's been in a pot 2 years, so we can start work. But that's not the case, because you can only ever be guided in bonsai by the tree. And so it can take any number of years and any number of repottings and careful work to build that powerful root system. But until we've got that powerful root system, whatever we see above the ground is only a reflection of what's happening within the soil. So if there's nothing really going on up here, there's a chance that there's not much going on in here. Once we've got that root system, we're then starting to look at building a branch system, and of course that happens hand in hand, because we're not cutting all the branches off while we grow the roots. It's the leaves that create the energy that feed the roots and promote the root growth. So of course, as the root system is developing, we're developing ahead of branches. And to me, good quality bonsai is a trunk. You've got your root system, you've got a trunk, you've got primary branches, secondary branches, tertiary branches, you've got fine ramification on the ends. And it's important to know and understand that each of those stages is specific. So, and each specific stage has a specific requirement in terms of the way that we grow, what we're growing, the way we prune, the techniques that we're using. So if we're, and this is particularly for deciduous trees, so we'll kind of focus on those. There's lots of crossover with evergreens, but for the sake of this evening, we'll sort of focus on deciduous trees. So it's very, very difficult to thicken a branch if you're using a refinement pruning technique. And it's very, very difficult to get a refinement and dense ramification if you're using sort of primary growing techniques. And as the tree develops, the requirement for the horticultural requirements change. So what we've got to do in the initial stages is build primary branch structure. Once we've built a root system, we've got a vigorous tree, something's growing really well, it's putting on extension, then we can start to do some branch selection, get rid of the branches that we don't need, and then the ones that we do, we grow those, and we just grow them potentially unchecked for some time. When it comes to the subject of thickening branches, everybody, excuse me, always asks, how long should I grow it before I prune it? Well, how thick do you want it? If you want a thick branch, you've got to grow a long way. And you know, I've told the story before of a friend of mine who had a big elm stump office, and it had no branches at all, really, just little first year shoots. And he needed that big, thick primary first branch, and he grew it for the first year, and it was about yay long. And he brought it back in the autumn and said, "Should I prune it?" And it was, you know, 3-4 mil. And said, "Is it thick enough?" No, it's nowhere near thick enough. Leave it. And in the second year, he brought it back, and by then it was, I don't know, this thick, and that went on for a long time. Eventually, there was a stick in the soil, and it was about 12 to 18 feet in the air. And the branch was thick enough, and you know, the branch was about that big for where he wanted it and what he wanted. It was right. We wired it in the early days, so it had the right shape to it. It had the nodes, and we kept little side branches, so then he could cut it. So it had taken, I suppose, about certainly 4 years, and all he'd done was grown that piece. but that piece was that big, off a big gnarly, hollow, craggy old trunk, and it looked really good. So then when he'd done that, he took 2 little side shoots and he grew those in the same process again. So how long have I got to grow these? Well, how thick do you need them? So once, in effect, those side branches were about half the thickness of the main branch, then he cut those. And so 5, 6, 7 years down the road, all he's got is sort of one here, like with 2 on the end. And that's how long it takes to build deciduous trees if you want to do a good quality job. Now you can do something, say like this, and use a little wire and the branches that you've got and kind of tie those all into place and style that. It looks like bonsai, but you all know as well as I do, when we take the wire off, it all just goes back to what it was before, so it's not bonsai. So with a tree like this, what we're looking at doing is selecting, realistically, probably the first 2 to 4 inches of branch. Now, for the sake of this evening, and so it's not too dull for you or too drastic, I'm not just going to cut it all off. So we're going to use it and we're going to style it, because there's no reason why things can't look half decent while we're developing them as bonsai. It doesn't all have to look like a field hospital full of amputees because we're just chopping everything all the while. We want to try and make things look reasonable. But you've got to bear in mind that we can't build secondary branch until we've built primary branch. And I've made that mistake, I suppose. One of the most famous trees I did years ago, went to a top European exhibition and I never brought it home. Because when it got there, I could see all the mistakes I'd made and how I rushed it and pushed it. And it looked amazing, but underneath, I just knew that it wasn't as good as I knew I could have made it had I taken my time. So you know, that tree's still doing the circuit, and it's, you know, it's still very well known, and it's won a lot of trophies, and you know, but that's because it went into the hands of some skilled people who subsequently developed it very, very well. But you know, that was one of the first trees I styled with wire, and you know, my skill with patience back then was not perhaps what it is today. So, like I say, in terms of building deciduous trees, that primary branch, that first part of the branching structure, is very important. And as you all know as well as I do, with deciduous trees, when the leaves are off, you can see it all. And of course, if you made a mistake, and if you made a mistake, this tree has never been worked before. It's been dug, it's been put in a pot. Actually, it came in a bucket, and it's been bare rooted, and it's gone into this pot, and it's now its second year in this pot. And everything you can see there, all this branch work has grown over the last couple of years. So there's no point in leaving this any longer, because we're not going to achieve any more progress by leaving it longer. It's got the root system, it's got the growth, it's done really well this year, and immediately this work is completed. Within 2 to 3 weeks it'll be sprouting everywhere. From experience, they respond very, very quickly. So there's a time at this point now that we can take a step forward. But if your tree is not sort of in a pot such that it's solid and rooted, and you know, I drove down here in a Mini, and you know, they haven't got the best suspension in the world, and it's still not rattled loose, so I know it's good. The quickest way to get where you want to be in bonsai is take your time. You know? But at the same time, you need to have a plan for your trees. It's no good just going out and deciding I'm going to do some bonsai today and just go grab some scissors and start cutting. You have to have a plan, and you have to look at your tree quite critically, and you have to determine what it is that you want to achieve. Do I need to thicken branches? Do I need secondary branches? Am I looking for denser ramification? There's so many different elements that we want to build. And in my opinion, you can't really call something bonsai until it's sitting there perfectly shaped with all the different stages of branch structure and no wire in sight. And at that point, then you can put it into a bonsai pot. But if you put it into a bonsai pot any time prior to that, what you're going to do is make the whole thing take so much longer than it naturally should do. And you know, none of us are getting any younger, and so the more ways we can figure to get these things going faster, the better. We do have an issue as a business that I would choose to put all of my trees in deep, tall pots. You know, the ones you get in a garden centre with the big handles on that comes with trees in them, because everything grows in those twice as fast as it does anything else. But nobody will ever buy a tree in one of those, so we have to kind of compromise, and we go for these sort of half pots, which will still allow a significant amount of growth. But also, you know, if you have a big deep pot, everybody assumes there's some hideous root issue going on in there. There's a big lump of wood or something that they're going to have to deal with. So generally, these sort of half-sized pots, something fairly large, is going to give you more growth, more roots, more top growth, more roots, and it snowballs.
Graham, I bought that drum room.
Yeah.
Is that a sort of size that would be all right?
Yeah, I used those for years. I used to work in print and used hundreds of those and drill all holes in them. And you get really good growth. You plant the tree right at the top, so it's standing on a lot of soil. So you get a massive amount of root in a very small area. And it's all close into the trunk. Whereas if you've got something in a big wooden box or a seed flat or something, all the roots go around the outside. So with tall, slender pots, it all stays close. And then when you come to repot, because it's easy, because say something like this, you just, you know, if we put this in that, or we know full well we can take it out of that in a few years' time, put the saw through there, discard that piece, and then rake this out in the normal way, and it can go straight into a pot, into a bonsai pot once it's formed. But putting things in bonsai pots seems to be the primary reason why very, very many people never get their trees developed, because it just slows the growth rate down. We don't want strong, rampant growth when we're looking to build that final degree of ramification. And at that point, we're looking at small leaves and very fine details in the tree. So we don't want rampant growth that we would get in big buckets at that point. So, you know, horses for courses, as they say. So the right pot for the right point in the development of the tree is going to make life a whole lot easier. And bonsai pots do not make bonsai. You know, I know so many people that buy raw material offers and then they go, well, what sort of pot? That's the very first question. Raw material like this, and the very first question is, well, what sort of pot would you put it in? It doesn't need a pot because it's not bonsai. Always bonsai go in bonsai pots. If I'm bonsai, don't put it in a bonsai pot. And that way, you won't end up with a shed full of pots that you can't use. And also, your trees will be developing really, really quickly. So, I think that the understanding of choosing, grasping the understanding of how we develop bonsai and at what stage a tree is at and what it requires for that stage is something that really is, to a certain extent, being glossed over, and you have to look quite hard in a lot of the sort of published work to actually understand that. And, you know, I mean, as humans, we tend to do our utmost to simplify everything as much as we can. And so I think that, you know, everything in bonsai, I mean, everybody asks me questions and I say, well, it depends, because everything depends on something. But unfortunately, so many people who have taught bonsai in the past have neglected to really put things in context. And I think that any technique that you apply, whether it's defoliation with the way that you're pruning branches, wiring, candle pinching, so on and so forth, which we'll come to later with the pines and things. All of those things have to be put in context. But most of the books that we were brought up on, I think, you know, 25, 30, 40 years ago, on bonsai, were really just teaching refinement techniques. But most of us don't work on refined bonsai. Most of us work on raw material and things that we're improving and developing. And I think that it's a shame a lot of good people have been lost to bonsai over the years because of frustration, because of a lack of progress, because they're using the wrong techniques at the wrong time or have an unrealistic expectation of what's going to be achieved. I mean, the trouble is when you get some young lad comes into a workshop, you know, and then he brings his little tree and you go, yeah, it's going to be at least 15 years before that looks like anything at all. You're not going to keep it, you know. Who's got that time? So there's a place for the whole wiring, styling, demo, producing a tree, making an entertaining demonstration, and, you know, a fellow making himself look good because he appears to make something out of nothing. There's a place for that, but long term, that doesn't necessarily, not to say that it can't, but it doesn't necessarily produce the best of quality bonsai. You know, if you're wiring a tree for the 10th or 15th time over 20 years, you know, you may want to consider that there are some other ways to approach this. But a lot of people, bonsai starts and ends with wiring. And so much shaping can be achieved with a tree. with pruning, but also a lot of people won't wire, and the bonsai reflect that. So wiring, all of these techniques that we have, wiring and pruning, and also of course carving and so on and so forth, all of those things are like tools in a toolbox, and the more tools we've got, the more work we can do, the more skills that we begin to develop, and the better quality our trees start to become. It does depend on realistically using more or less everything that we've got available at our disposal. So, any questions so far?
If you put say lift a plant from the ground and put it in a large container, what medium soil do you put it into?
If you're using deep pots, doesn't matter. We use a lot of those at home, and we're using just garden compost out of the compost heap. You know, not a garden centre compost, actual compost, you know, made from leaves and grass clippings and all the rest of it. Whereas if you're going into a shallow pot, drainage becomes more significant. Whereas with a deep pot, you'll find that water can drain through it, and the tree will grow depending on the variety of tree. It will grow more roots in one level than another because it will find its ideal conditions. And that's one of the reasons we've found for using those is really good, that you get a lot of root typically in one area. So with something like an elm or privet, you'll get much more root in the bottom half, whereas for say a juniper or a pine, you'll get more root in the top half because they prefer different conditions. So the soil's not critical, really. It's only critical when you start to go into pots of this sort of size, because once you've got that powerful root system that we've mentioned briefly, the requirements become different, and ultimately, even at this stage, we've got a lot of tree and a very small amount of soil, and everything in that pot needs to be really working for the tree. It's absolutely no use if we've got a huge lump of clay in there from the mountains, or a big lump of rock, or a big piece of wood still attached to the bottom of the tree, because all of a sudden, you know, that pot you end up growing on 30–40% of the volume of soil. Or in a bonsai pot, very often, I mean, we've seen a lot of very old bonsai and they're full of all sorts of crap in the middle, and realistically they're living on 1.5 inches of soil on the outside. So we've had trees in pots this big, and they're living in as much soil as in that pot. It doesn't make any sense. You need everything within a pot to be working really well for a tree, but it's much less critical the deeper the pot becomes. Whereas if, you know, with the smaller, the shallower it becomes, the more of an issue it becomes. For a tree like this has not had any work at all. This one's actually come from Italy, and it's got a little shari down the front, which all died back naturally. We just peeled the bark, or just flicked all the bark off actually at the weekend. And in the top, there's another little piece up here. It's got a nice little dog leg in there, and that bark has died off naturally. There's no carving done on this. All we've done is cleaned it up. And but to me, what I love about these is the bark. The small leaves are amazing. They grow really well. They're fully frost hardy here. They're one of the best broadleaf trees that we've worked on for the last few years. They just work so well. And this, you know, it's not the most amazing tree in the world, but the trouble is we're starting to move things really fast, and so it's difficult to always have something that's just at the right stage to be able to work on for an event like this evening. So when you style a tree for the first time, I mean, a lot of people buy raw material off us and they immediately go, oh, what should I do with it? Well, if you don't know what to do with it, don't do anything with it. You know, I mean, you can walk up to a piece of raw material if you've got any experience at all, and there's just something about it that speaks to you. I have people at my garden all the time, and I've got 200 quid to spend, what should I buy? Well, I don't know. If you don't love it, don't buy it. If you've got something in it that doesn't sort of speak to you or reach out to you, don't buy it. If you do end up with something and you're not too sure what to do with it, don't do anything. Just live with it. I mean, we have a general rule that I would impose upon everybody given the choice with bonsai. When you get a new tree, you don't do anything for a year. It may need some pruning, but you don't do anything significant for a year. Watch the tree, watch how it grows, observe how quickly the soil dries, how much water it's drawing out of the soil. the foliage colour, the growth rate. There's so many things in a tree that you need to know before you can really decide what it is you want to do. So whenever you get anything new, just live with it for a year. Just keep it looking as nice as it does, and you know, very, very quickly you'll start to understand that particular tree and how it's growing. And by doing that, you'll avoid, to a greater extent, the problem that so many people have where things get overworked or they get knocked onto the back foot, they become weakened and stressed because somebody says, oh, it's been in the pot 2 years, we can work it now. I've got trees at home that have been in the pot 18 years and they haven't been worked yet. Because I'm just not ready, it's not ready. You know, there's so many different factors involved, and you know, I'm lucky enough to have a lot of trees, so I don't need to work everything all the time. And a lot of people, they're driven crazy because every time they come to the garden, these trees are still sitting there. But I don't have, I'm not a control freak in that way. I don't have everything looking amazing all the while. I don't mind things just sort of being in their natural state, especially if it's good material, because it's amazing anyway. But it doesn't have to be imposed upon by me. It can just sit there and do its thing. So when it comes to styling something, if you're not too sure what to do, don't do anything. And if you live with something long enough, one day you'll wake up in the morning and you'll know exactly what to do. Somehow these things will come out of your subconscious mind. I mean, I've worked with a lot of people who do bonsai demonstrations over the years, and some of them are extremely impressive in their ability to style and create amazing bonsai. And I've found that very, very, very intimidating for a long time. But one of the things I realised quite quickly was if somebody else can do it, there's no reason why I can't do it. Given equal opportunity and potentially a lot of hard work, I found that you don't necessarily need to be particularly gifted in life to be good at something, but you do need to be determined and you do need to work on it. And one of the things I found over the years of doing styling demos is that very, very few people ever take a piece of raw material and style it in one go. We've all watched 100 different demos of all sorts of clever artistic people styling and shaping trees that have been amazed by it. But then most people never go home and try it themselves. Years ago when I was doing lots of workshops with all and sundry, I used to go and spend a day with somebody to do the workshop, and then I'd go home, and when everybody else had gone to bed, I'd go out into the workshop till it got light in the morning and do the same thing again, but on my own. And you learn by doing, not by hearing or seeing. And the more you do, certainly in bonsai in relation to styling, the more you do, the better you get.